Right, you're back in the DFSR. It's an NFL podcast. It's Tuesday, December 4th. I'm Doug Norrie, that is.
James Davis.
From dailyfantasysportsrankings.com is the site, dfsr.com. For short, get you started, keep winning on FanDuel and DraftKings, NFL, NBA optimal lineups as well. Members-only premium chat, premium content. It's all covered in your subscription. So go check it out at dfsr.com/deals, and that's a special deal for the podcast and or YouTube or Twitch stream.
Hello YouTube and or Twitch people.
We'll have links for that going up in the podcast today too, as we throw our I would say pretty faces, but that's probably not the word. Our rough, our hard scrabbled faces,
distinguished.
Yeah, all those words, all of those superlatives apply to our faces. dfsr.com/deals. We'll get you started. We are going to take a look back at Week 13 in the NFL. Interesting week. It was a good week to be a guy that not many people, if you're the lay football fan, there was guys that had huge weeks that I'm sure some people have never even heard of. If you're like in the DFS community, even some people in the DFS community might not have heard some of the guys that had some pretty big weeks this week. But we'll go back and break it down. The biggest news of the week, though, was our Carlos Hyde bet that we had going in Week 13 on the live stream before lock. We set an epic over-under bet on Carlos Hyde's 14 carries. You took the over. I took the under. You want to recap how about Benel you took on that, or should we just move on to some other?
I was actually going to bring this up with you because as I was looking at things more closely, I feel like maybe you took advantage of me.
Why is that?
Well, because I think we said 14 touches, and he actually did have 14 touches. And so that should have been a push. I think we said touches.
I mean, I'm sure people want to hear about this. We can keep going on.
I'm just messing with you. Carlos Hyde had 13 carries instead of 14, so you hit the nail right on the head. And I will say that I was wrong about it because they were in a position where they probably ought to have been running the ball more, and they decided, well, I guess they did run the ball, but they just didn't want to give Carlos Hyde all the carries after he was, had less than 3 yards per carry and then fumbled one time. They thought that had been sort of enough Carlos Hyde for the day, and I get it,
So, all right. Well, I'm sure people don't want to hear a lot of Carlos Hyde talk, but I was still feeling good about that. There's a lot to break down from this week. Now a couple other things just as like sort of side notes. If you are a Redskins quarterback right now, which is now Mark Sanchez,
again, I'm not a Redskins quarterback. So,
are you? Well, would you be concerned that your leg was going to break? Because Alex Smith, his leg breaks, and then Colt McCoy last night, his leg breaks, and now you're Mark Sanchez, and you're thinking it's good to be on a team.
So you think it's like a Tanya Harding situation now, where they're just like. Just worried that they're like just taking it a little bit personally at this point.
Maybe they built that stadium on like an actual Indian burial ground or something like that.
Whoa, Native American burial ground. Who is this guy? What are you talking about?
And now it's the curse of the Redskins now, where if you're just the quarterback, you're just gonna get your leg broken. But Sanchez, I'm wondering your thoughts though, because Sanchez actually does come. He gets the start. He doesn't get the start. He comes in and fills in. He looked pretty bad, but he's the minimum this week going into DraftKings, going and playing the Giants, who admittedly stink on defense. Could you see people taking a shot at the Sanchez here? We have him as right now the third overall points per dollar play on DraftKings going into the week. It's only because he's 4,000 though. I mean, it's so much cheaper than really any other quarterback. Let me just look real quick. Right, so he's 10% cheaper than the next least most expensive quarterback. Could you see people taking a shot on Sanchez, knowing that he's just playing the Giants and their defense against the pass has been pretty bad?
Yeah, I mean, I could see people doing it. I'm not sure it's the correct play. Again, I haven't looked at this week really at all yet in terms of who the good plays are at quarterback. We'll be doing that later today. It's often correct to consider playing a really cheap quarterback, and I think you can get carried away with it. We talked about that with Mullins a few weeks ago, but we've also played Lamar Jackson. So it's really just a case-by-case thing. I would say in the case of Sanchez going up against wait, who's he going up against this week?
The Giants.
The Giants. Jeez, I looked at this, and then my mind froze when I saw the Jets, and I just assumed Sanchez was on the Jets. Going up against the Giants, that's a good enough matchup to where you shouldn't rule it out altogether. But I think Sanchez, one of the things we like about cheap quarterbacks is when they run, because pretty much no matter how bad you are at throwing the ball, if you're just a running quarterback, that tends to translate to the NFL. In the case of Sanchez, that's not really the case. So, we'll consider it, but I'm hoping to not have to do it.
All right, let's break down some quarterback play come this week. We're going to go through running backs and wide receivers as well, because there's plenty to talk about in terms of just overall performances. And like I said, there are some names that popped up on the leader list this week that that just didn't. There weren't guys you would have expected going into the week. But we ended up starting Mahomes in cash.
We did.
Ended up kind of on FanDuel get there sort of luckily on the back end of a Conley touchdown right at the end.
He was already there on a price way. I mean, we cashed on the back end, but those 4 points didn't make a difference. He still would have been the highest scoring quarterback on the day.
Correct. That I was gonna say that he ended up being. We saw him as being easily the highest floor, the highest upside guy of the week. That ended up being the case. Without Kareem Hunt, they're going to walk into kind of a similar situation this week, being short on at least a running back. I'm not sure what the Watkins thing is. Where do we stand on guys like Mahomes? We typically do not want to pay. We typically don't end up wanting to pay top dollar for quarterbacks because the position is fairly safe. You can get high floors just from about any price point. But
sure.
Could you see him being, I don't know, another play this week? He's still the most expensive guy, but he's not like overwhelmingly more expensive than guys like Roethlisberger, Rodgers, who I want to talk about here in a second, and some of these other guys. What are your thoughts on Mahomes? Because again, he kind of lapped the competition just for another week.
Yeah, I mean, talk about surprises from the week. No one picked up Kareem Hunt. This guy clears waivers. No one in the league needs a kicker.
I heard people say that after that.
A kicker? Do you get it? No one needs a kicker.
It's brutal. It's also not funny, and it's off. It's too off color for me. But I don't make jokes like that.
My bad. I do sometimes. Not usually live on the podcast.
All right. Do we just see him as just such a tier higher than every other quarterback at this point? It's going to be kind of another close call about if this is where we want to spend all your salary and. Or not all your salary, but a significant amount of it. And we just get another week where he's 52 yards rushing, throws for 4 touchdowns. What part of his game is not going to keep doing this on a week-to-week basis? Like it's so much better than everyone else. Is crazy.
Yeah, so I think you'll still play Mahomes in really good matchups at this price point. I think going up against Baltimore, you probably don't need to do it. I do think he's the best fantasy quarterback. That's not a controversial statement. He extended his lead over the field that was already 40 points going into this week and has further extended it now. So I think we are in a place now where we probably actively will look to play Mahomes. I will say it still kind of feels like cheating a little bit. Like the guy goes out there, he was not very efficient. He was 23 for 38 and still managed to put up 33 fantasy points. Didn't use Hill. And I think you actually sort of like to see that. You like to see that he isn't too reliant upon any single piece in his offense to get the job done, meaning that opposing defenses can take away, either Kelsey or Hill, and he can probably still do it. And you like to see that he could still do it without Kareem Hunt. So, yeah, my evaluation of Mahomes has gone up after last week, and I probably would still not play him against Baltimore.
Oh, man, Hill. If you watch that game, Hill was so close. We had him in cash. I loved him. He was a lock for me this week.
Yeah, he was a hugely played player in general.
Yeah, he was so close. Just knowing his skill set, he was so close to like 150 yards and 2 touchdowns. Basically like fingertips away in terms of catching the ball. Some other quarterback play. If you look at some of these total attempts, like a guy like Russell Wilson threw the ball 17 times, ran the ball 4 times.
Yeah, so naturally he had 4 touchdowns. You said, right?
25 fantasy points. It's got to be the least. It's going to be the most fantasy points for a quarterback on the least amount of opportunity. Yeah. Basically 21 total touches. I'm counting passing attempts as a touch here. Wasn't even all that efficient. Some defensive stuff got them down and close, so that they just didn't have to do a lot of work. He's been a guy, but on a week-to-week basis, he's been fine sort of fantasy-wise, but he hasn't had to throw the ball at all. He walks into a fairly interesting matchup. I think they play San Francisco this week, but I'll go find it. But anyway, guys on Wilson, what do we do with overall attempts and usage on him? It's been pretty low for the season. This was easily the lowest that we've seen yet, and they played Minnesota on Monday night. But can we not go crazy with his kind of attempts? Because on his per attempt, he's pretty good, but he just doesn't seem to get enough usage to sometimes warrant it.
Yeah, you don't need to play Wilson. I mean, he had a good week on 0 touches, and that's fine. Like, if you happen to play Wilson for whatever reason, you're probably pretty happy with your decision. But, I mean, there's guys in the same price range. People like Deshaun Watson against Indy. Jared Goff is only 200 more than him, scoring 10% more fantasy points per game this season. Even Mitch Trubisky. I just don't think Wilson matters for DFS purposes. Unfortunately, he can have a good week occasionally, especially with the rushes. He can occasionally put up a rushing touchdown or whatever, but outside of just really niche GPP areas, and even then I probably wouldn't do it just because the overall opportunity is so low. I don't care about Wilson at all.
A question about Aaron Rodgers. So the Packers obviously fire Mike McCarthy right after the loss to the Cardinals. I did say on the live stream, I thought that line, I don't really bet football, so it's neither here nor there. I don't regret it, but I did think rarely do lines stand out to me being like, oh, this is a crazy one. And I was like 14 points for the Packers over the Cardinals. The Packers really aren't that good. They end up just outright losing to Arizona, and McCarthy gets promptly fired before the team even hits the bus to go home. But Rodgers, he threw 50 passes. A lot of people speculated that a big part of the problem for the Packers is the Mike McCarthy play calling so atrocious. What do we make of them going into, because they have a decent matchup this week. They are coming off a terrible week. They're basically, I think, out of the playoffs. They're definitely out of the playoffs at this point. And I don't know what to make of the Packers. Like, do you think we see a 1 week remotivation because they're switching the coaches here? Because guys like Rodgers, I mean, they're 6-point favorites against Atlanta still. For some reason, Jamal Williams. I have so many thoughts on the Packers. I'm all over the place here. But what are your thoughts on a guy like Aaron Rodgers? It's a very good matchup. It's a new coach. He has not really paid this in a little bit, and he was bad again this week. I don't know. What are your thoughts here, knowing that the coaching change?
Yeah, so generally, I'm not inclined to forecast what a coaching change is going to do to a player, especially one as important as a quarterback, just because it tends to be a fool's errand. Unless you're really like an X's and O's, like, you're capable of sitting down there and who the other offensive coordinator that's going to come in. I think you can put yourself in a pretty awkward position trying to be the guy who can guess that. I will say the thing that's been sort of odd about Rodgers to me, at least recently, is that the yards per attempt have come down so much. I mean, he's a guy that seemed totally capable early in the season of putting up decent yardage on, not so many attempts. And recently that hasn't been the case. I mean, 50 passing attempts for 233 yards, 4.6 yards per attempt in this game. It just seems like that could be a play calling issue, right? Like it could be a case where, they're putting him in the position to throw too many short passes, or I don't know exactly what it is. But it's kind of odd too, because this season the efficiency has also come down. So I'm a little bit worried about Rodgers' core skill set. I'm a little bit worried that part of it could have been play calling. But, so at some point quarterbacks do get old, and one of the things that goes is arm strength. And Rodgers now at 35 years old is in that sort of age range where you could expect some attrition in that skill set. So all this to say, I'd really like to wait a week if I had to play Rodgers, especially in cash. And I know at that point he'll probably be more expensive. This is a great matchup. I think surely you can tap into it for big tournament purposes, but I'm going to proceed a little bit cautiously, because a new coaching change could also, people think Mike McCarthy was bad. The new guy could be worse. Like, you just don't know. So I'm not going to assume an automatic upgrade just because they fired a guy and are bringing in someone new.
Any other quarterback play that stand out to you this week? People were on Jameis this week. He ended up being pretty good for his price point in terms of cash. Josh Allen had a huge week, mostly on his legs. He ran for 135 yards.
Yeah,
any of these guys that you want to point out to, and we can go like the opposite way too, like guys like Cam sort of struggled again. Any other quarterback plays stand out to you this week?
Yeah. Jameis, we liked Jameis. I think he was the second overall guy in the next lineups after Mahomes for us, and he was a 66% play. He was excellent, and he could have been a lot better. The Bucs just didn't put him in a great position to succeed in the second half. Like, he basically just did nothing at all, and went into halftime, I think, with like 18 points and finished with 22 or something like that. So we kind of dodged a bullet by not having him, to be honest, given that where that first half was headed. After him, I thought it was interesting to see some guys that are on the fringes. I mean, these are mostly tournament plays probably, but guys like Mariota, Nick Mullins having pretty reasonable weeks. Mariota was, of course, building upon his nearly perfect week. He was nowhere near perfect. He was back to that old Marcus Mariota, but still pretty productive, and the type of guy that you can get for cheap that most people aren't very excited about. The one notable bad guy for me was Andrew Luck. He had been one of the highest floor plays on the entire season, really. I mean, it was like 22 to 25 fantasy points like clockwork every single week, and then we saw him come out and lay an egg. And I don't know that he really hurt anyone for cash game purposes, just because there were a lot of really good quarterback options, and Jacksonville's such a tough matchup, so maybe you just give him a pass because it was Jacksonville. But yeah, that was his first week without 22 fantasy points since week 2. So
they got shut out. They lost. It's such a crazy line. Like, they get shut
6-0.
out by Jacksonville. That was starting Carlos Hyde and Cody Kessler. Which I know those guys don't play defense, but just the idea that those guys.
You only needed the one touchdown. That was it.
That's what I mean. So it was just a very crazy outlier game. I'm not really making too much of it from that standpoint. There's no reason to overreact to games like that. I don't think, when you have a season worth of sample size that just tell you that this guy is among the very best fantasy quarterbacks in football. On the running back end, it's going to be interesting again. So there was a lot of fill-in value. I'm putting value in quotes here. Going into last week, we had obviously Spencer Ware, who was a tremendous start, tremendously high own start, and that wasn't going to be news to anybody, because he just on the back of the Kareem Hunt news, it stood to reason that he was going to have a lot of ownership. But also guys like Austin Eckler, who was filling in for Melvin Gordon. I'm trying to think. I thought there was one other guy, but we kind of were high on Aaron Jones. We can talk about that in a second. But I'm wondering your thoughts on the Ware and Eckler situation. Eckler he got touches, but he was not very good at all. And they did bring in Justin Jackson to spell him a little bit, though. If you look at the snap count, it was very much Eckler. Eckler was 49-14. I know Jackson carried the ball 8 times for 63 yards and a touchdown.
Right.
Eckler really outsnapped him and did touch the ball 21 times, 13 carries, 8 targets, good for only 43 total yards. Would you be there in another good matchup this week? They're in a better matchup this week going into Oakland. Would you be comfortable going back to Eckler, like maybe in cash? I know he was not on the main slate. He would have been in our cash lineups had that been on been a main slate game. Would you feel comfortable going back to him for that kind of usage? Is the fact that they used Jackson and he was like sort of effective worry you at all? The price has come up a little bit, but this, at least from an early standpoint, this game is standing out as like a time where you want to play running backs.
Yeah, so I think with Eckler, you love to see the 8 targets. I think it is troubling. Like, the snap count doesn't really matter to me when they bring in the other guy specifically to give him the ball, which when it comes to running backs. So, like, when you think about wide receivers, sometimes the play breaks down and the wide receiver just gets the ball, even if the plan wasn't to get them the ball. With running backs, especially with carries, like, the team is like, we're going to give the ball to the running back. Who do we want to give it to? And the fact that Eckler wasn't that guy with such a high frequency on plays where they really wanted to run is a little bit concerning. I mean, he's in a price range now that is not an attractive one if you're only going to be that bad on a per touch basis. But I have to think, especially that week before is still calling to me, that Arizona week where he caught 11 of 10 targets for 68 yards. I still think he's kind of a low end wide receiver who's going to get 10 to 15 carries, and I think that's probably ultimately enough. So I think I could stomach Eckler. I would understand why people would be off it, but he also strikes me as the kind of guy, just given how we've seen Los Angeles would prefer to run the ball too. Like, Phillip Rivers has been quietly a really low attempt guy on the season, in spite of being pretty talented and having, some pretty good weapons around him. I still think that there's room for Eckler, and if he winds up in cash games, I would not feel great about it, but I could live with it.
The Spencer Ware Damian Williams snap count difference was about the same as well. Ware went 49 snaps, Damian Williams went 19. Ware carried the ball 14 times, had 1 target in the passing game, and then Williams carried the ball 5 for 38. His price has come up a little bit, but he's only still going to be 5,200 on DraftKings. Do you still think that the plan in KC is to roll like this, like that Kareem Hunt roll, which is basically you're basically the only running back? We're going to have a guy who spells you for maybe a quarter of the snaps or something like that, but that's essentially going to be it. Would you feel the fact that Ware really, he saw big ownership, didn't see a ton of production here? Do you think he might be worth it going back to? It's not a great matchup versus Baltimore, but they're 7-point home favorites as well.
Yeah, I'll take Ware. I think, excuse me. I think it was kind of a weird game from Kansas City's perspective because Oakland kept it a lot closer than obviously they would have expected, and I think for that reason, my guess is if the game goes the way it will normally go in Kansas City, that the running backs will have more opportunity. So I'll start by saying that. Also, this was the time they threw to running backs the least in this game in any week since I think it was week 5 against Jacksonville. So not that this is a team that throws to the running back all that often, but the fact that there were only, I think it was like 2 or 3 targets to running backs this game, that strikes me as about half of what we could reasonably expect, and Ware has shown an ability to catch balls in the past. So I think Ware is still, especially at DraftKings at a $5,200 price point, I think he's still a good play. And I wouldn't be surprised if there was a week for Ware in the future where he just gets 20 touches and you're not even thinking twice on this price point.
Yeah, I think I'm totally with you. And then beyond those guys, we saw some of the usual suspects. Gurley touches the ball 28 times, has another huge week, 2 touchdowns. McCaffrey touches the ball 20 times. He went for over 150 yards again, played every single snap on offense, which has just been the trend for them. As the season wears on, he just continues to see more and more usage, really. Zeke touched the ball 27 times, or 29 times. So from those guys' team's perspective, we're not seeing a ton of change. They just still remain among the highest usage running backs in the league. But the final 2 questions I have before we move on to wide receiver are Philip Lindsay. 19 carries, 157 yards, 2 touchdowns. People did play him a little bit. We've been cautious about playing him because as long as Royce Freeman sticks around, there just seems to always be the threat of just a running back by committee. And then I would like your thoughts on James Conner as well, because we have another week where kind of touches the ball sort of up toward 20 times, gets 2 touchdowns, barely any yards. Any thoughts on these two guys? Lindsey's the one I have the biggest problem with because I can never blow it out of the box with his projection. That's always going to keep us low in the system, and he just has proven that wrong more times than not.
Yeah, I don't know about more times than not, but he definitely has proven it wrong on a handful of occasions. And actually, this would have been a much better time to make fun of me about my Carlos Hyde take, because that take was specifically in the context of who you asked me who I would like better for big tournaments, Philip Lindsay or Carlos Hyde, and I said Hyde. Lindsay was actually just in the winning $1 million lineup, so yeah, didn't get that one exactly correct. And I still think though that the analysis at the time stands. So Denver gave the ball to either Lindsay or Freeman 31 times in this game. And I just don't think that's going to be the plan on a week-to-week basis. Just most teams don't hand the ball off to a running back 31 times. I don't know how else to say it. And certainly if you fall behind or, there's a lot of things that can happen where you can't be in the position to do that. So, yeah, it definitely worked out this week. San Francisco is another week that it could work out, no doubt about it. And Lindsay obviously has that explosive playmaking ability. He's $900 more than he was last week. I didn't really like him at $7,000. I really can't envision myself playing him at almost $8,000, really in any matchup, just because in the back of my mind, I'm going to be sitting there wondering, I'm really playing this guy who's like in a full-on running back by committee, or at least he's a 2-down back, and Alvin Kamara is 400 more against Tampa Bay, or I can even get Nick Chubb for cheaper, a guy with proven usage. Aaron Jones is cheaper. I'm just going to play one of these other guys.
Yep, and I think, and then the last guy, like I mentioned, was Connor. Connor walks into another situation. They play Oakland this week. Oakland's garbage. Pittsburgh's 11-point favorites. Week after week, I feel like we've made a lot of game script sort of. Now, again, he was good because he scored 2 touchdowns in this game. So,
and we were off Connor going into this week anyway, right? I mean, I think we talked about it. I think we looked at the Denver game, as I recall, and I don't think we were making excuses at that point. I think we were basically saying, okay, this might just be the plan in Pittsburgh right now, and that bore out this week. He only touched the ball 18 times. I still think he's probably aggressively priced for the way Pittsburgh plans to use him, but we know that in the right situation, he can absolutely go off too. So I don't know that you want to be in the business of guessing when James Conner is going to be a mid-20s running back again, because we know that recently being a low teens running back happens more often.
Well, and if we look at the price tiers, the most expensive FanDuel running backs this week on the main slate are McCaffrey at 91, Saquon at 89, Zeke at 88, and then you dip down to Connor about 5% lower at 8,400. He's still, if you look at the whole season, Connor's still 3rd in the league in terms of touches per game, behind Elliott and Gurley. McCaffrey though is gaining on them because he had some of the early stuff. If we just look at recent weeks, I think McCaffrey it would definitely be a little bit closer. And sometimes with NFL, you do want to have a little bit of recency bias at least. If the team is like trying to change some of their scheme or just how they're going to roll out some of their guys. Well, let's finish off with wide receiver. A lot was made this week, at least on Twitter, by someone like the better fantasy analysts. And if you, I guess, know anything about football, it wasn't a shock when you look at Keenan Allen, 19 targets, but the reason being that Pittsburgh simply would not stop putting a linebacker on him in the slot. Like that's all they did the entire game. They never moved a cornerback almost never moved the cornerback into the slot the whole game. And the Chargers were basically like, okay.
I love it. They made Keenan Allen beat them, dude. Who do you want to face? Just quick question, gun to your head. Who do you want to face? Austin Eckler or Keenan Allen?
And so they just continued to throw out. And I guess the linebacker they threw out there was like a guy who had been cut like 6 times. Like the linebacker is like not even a good linebacker. And this was made up. This went crazy on Twitter. But 19 targets out of him. It does seem like the context at least was. So we've seen big target games out of Keenan Allen. That's not the case. But when we look at 19 targets and we know that the other team was just doing something like objectively stupid, I don't think it seems like any other team in the world would just probably not do this. Where do you want to put Keenan in terms of overall target share? Because this 19 is going to start bumping him way up the list, and it does feel a little outlierish to me.
I mean, it is, but he's still got, like, if you just look at his last 5 weeks, let's say, so the 19, okay, Then 7 for 7 in Arizona. Love the efficiency, if not a huge number of targets. 12 targets from Denver, 9 in Oakland, 10 in Seattle. I think the plan, especially with Melvin Gordon out now, you got to keep in mind that there's a lot of those mid-range targets to go around because Gordon was excellent at catching the ball out of the backfield, and Eckler has been only okay. And even if you think they're going to shift 2 of those targets, it would have gone to Gordon to their slot receiver in Allen, who's obviously very effective, a super high efficiency player. You could see some good Keenan Allen weeks. And I mean, importantly, it's good to note here 4 touchdowns in the last 4 games, and he's just not priced like a top end wide receiver. Like in your mind, is he fundamentally different right now than like Devontae Adams, who's 800 more, or even Adam Thielen, who's more expensive? Like, I think that Keenan Allen is pretty similar to those guys, and I would be happy to pay less for what I wager to be a pretty similar production.
Yeah, it's really interesting because when you look at his price tier right now, I'm looking at DraftKings. The guys around him, you would easily take his production over, like Mike Evans, Julian Edelman,
Right.
AJ Green, of course, like just playing banged up. Julio Jones saw like nothing this week. We could talk about him in a second, and then we kind of take another step up to Tyreek Hill. But even like guys like Juju, from a cash game perspective, you'd feel much better about Allen in terms of just overall team target share. The Adams one's probably a little close for me, but then when you start looking at price, it maybe is not as close as I thought. Bad week out of Julio Jones. Our system did like him. He was felt like close to a cash game play for me going into the week. Thankfully, he did not get into the
He was in my Carlos Hyde lineups, Doug. Believe me, I noticed.
Going into this week, I thought he had a pretty good matchup here. I think he saw 8 targets, but only converted 2 for 18. What do we make of games like this? Because when we see these bad outlier games, it's hard to not, just go totally crazy about them. And it's still Julio Jones, and they're going to face a Packers team that they can probably do damage against.
Yeah, so I think it's just worth noting among the expensive receivers who has these types of games in them, and given that you only probably have the opportunity to play a single expensive wide receiver in any given week, you just saw that Julio Jones can be the guy who gets you 2 catches for 18 yards. And even Antonio Brown, with some of his conversion issues this season, doesn't have that type of game in him. And he's like 400 more. So I think if you're picking between, and Antonio Brown goes up against Oakland this week too, by the way. So pretty good spot there as well. I mean, just when you're comparing him across the board to some of these other guys, Devontae Adams has Atlanta, so going back against Julio. Michael Thomas has Tampa Bay. You're not going to play Julio Jones this week.
All right, any other wide receiver? This is a good week to have punt wide receivers: Dante Pettis, Zay Jones, Jaron Brown.
I mean, it was a good week if you could just be the guy who randomly guesses that Jaron Brown was going to have 2 touchdowns on 3 targets, but it wasn't that good a week for punt receivers that people actually played, basically outside of Chris Godwin. I think Godwin, we got the late news that he was going to start. He wound up being a chalk receiver that we actually didn't have in our lineups. Basically, our system was saying that you really only had room, and this is going to sound odd, but that you had room for 1 punt receiver, and it picked Conley. And Conley, of course, we get there in the ultimate stars aligning lucky moment with Mahomes to Conley 2 yards out when Kansas City probably should have been rushing at that point. So gonna go ahead and stuff my complaints about bad luck in a sack for at least a week. But Godwin this week, 5,600 going back into New Orleans. It's not clear that he'll get the start again. At least right now, Deshaun Jackson is only questionable. But I think if you see that Jackson is out or looking not so good, Godwin's still so cheap. It helped out so many people last week that I think you'd see him be a chalk play once again.
Yep, and we'll wait on the Deshaun Jackson news on that. And there's going to be, there's a lot to break down for we're going into week 14.
Yeah.
We will have our cash game piece coming out probably later today as we take a first look at cash games. Any other wide receivers or tight ends you want to touch on before we get out of here?
No, I think wide receiver was pretty much what you would have expected. I'd take that back. So wide receiver was not pretty much what you would have expected, but it was such a crap show, Doug. That's what we'll say to keep our non-explicit tag, that I don't know how much you can learn from it. So that's a better way to put it. So you had Allen and Brown having good weeks among wide receivers you've heard of. And then you had a huge sea of guys who you can't really expect things from. Then you have guys like Odell Beckham, who kind of had a good week scoring-wise, but was just awful in terms of he caught 3 balls for 35 yards, just happened to get a touchdown. It was just a very, very low-scoring week for wide receivers in general. So
he threw for a touchdown too. I mean, Odell throws for a touchdown too, as silly people still want to move him into the quarterback for Eli, because he just throw the ball as far as Eli, basically they're farther at this point. But he did throw a touchdown, which kind of boosted his overall fantasy production. You really can't count on that on a week-to-week basis. And Kelsey was the clear tight end all the targets I kind of translated over to Tyreek Hill all went to Travis Kelce instead. 13 targets. He went 12 for 13, 168 yards, 2 touchdowns. He's another one. If they're going to play without Sammy Watkins, you just have to bump all these other guys targets through the roof, and it just becomes a matter of where you want to prioritize your pricing.
Well, one last tight end too, and this isn't, again, a surprise to anyone, but I think people, if you played Eric Ebron, it wasn't pretty. He had the fumble, the score really wasn't there. The guy had 16 targets in this game, and again, he only turned it into about 10 fantasy points on FanDuel, and it was like 18 on DraftKings with a full PPR, but caught 10 balls. If you're going to catch 10 balls as a tight end, you're going to be in pretty good shape. And then the other guy that I wanted to highlight, just because Ebron's price, off of being just absolutely overwhelming chalk, I think he was 75% played on FanDuel, is Jimmy Graham, still cheap, 11 targets against Arizona. So worth keeping an eye on there, certainly for big tournaments, but potentially even for cash as well.
All right, we're going to get out of here. We'll be back later in the week talking cash games and game-by-game breakdown. Go and check out the Twitch stream and the YouTube stream. Those links will be in there if you want to catch us just kind of talking at each other. We're also going to be streaming going into Sunday lineup block again like we did last week, taking questions from chat and doing all the things to get you set for Sunday's main slate of games. DFSR.com/deals gets you started on that free 7-day trial for podcast listeners only. So go check that out. Buddy, let's go write some cash game picks.
Peace. All right, YouTube people, thanks for joining us on our podcasting adventure. If you like this, you can feel free to subscribe to the channel, and you can also find us over on DFSR.com or DailyFantasySportsRankings.com. Thanks, guys.